Have you ever wondered what the people who gave you life could ruthlessly take away? Lock your doors. Check the dark corners of your room. And listen closely. The worst nightmares do not come from strangers in the night. They come from your own flesh and blood, hiding a blade behind a familiar smile. Tonight, I will expose how an invisible trap was set for me, and how I crushed it over the heads of my own creators. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for being here with us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating and bringing you these contents. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are much longer, packed with intricate details we cannot share publicly on YouTube, and brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors in a single episode. You can join us right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive into today's nightmare, a story told through the eyes of our protagonist, 34-year-old Lillian Stewart. The crisp evening air of Denver usually brought me a sense of profound relief. I had just finished another grueling 14-hour shift at Viridia Horizon Solutions, the tech conglomerate I had built from the ground up. At 34 years old, my life was a meticulously calculated equation of server maintenance, board meetings, and stock valuations. My home in the secluded suburbs was supposed to be the one variable I could completely control, my sanctuary. As I turned my car onto the quiet street leading to my driveway, a chilling wave of recognition washed over me. A sleek, silver luxury sedan was speeding away from my property, its tires practically screeching against the asphalt. I did not need to see the license plate to know who it belonged to. It was Richard and Eleanor, my parents. We had not spoken in 6 months, not since I refused to give my father a seat on my board of directors. Their sudden appearance was a violent disruption to my peace. I parked my car and walked cautiously up the stone path to my front door. There, resting perfectly in the center of the welcome mat, was a square gift box. It was wrapped in immaculate, slate-gray paper and tied with an expensive satin ribbon. Tucked neatly beneath the bow was a thick, cream-colored card. I picked it up, my fingers trembling slightly against the cold evening air. The handwriting was Eleanor's, written in her signature sharp, aggressive cursive. The message was just one sentence: "Do not make things embarrassing." My heart began to hammer a heavy, irregular rhythm against my ribs. I carried the box inside, locking the heavy oak door behind me. Standing in the sterile, bright light of my kitchen island, I grabbed a paring knife and sliced through the satin ribbon. The paper fell away, and I lifted the lid. The breath completely left my lungs. The chill that started at the base of my spine radiated outward, freezing the blood in my veins. Resting on top of a bed of black tissue paper was a white, plastic access card. It was a perfect clone of the master key required to enter the top-secret server room of my company. Beside it sat an amber prescription bottle. I picked it up, squinting at the label. It was a bottle of high-dose sedatives. My name was printed clearly on the pharmacy sticker. I had never been prescribed this medication. I had not even visited a hospital in over 3 years. Beneath those 2 horrifying items was a thick stack of stapled documents. I pulled them out, the heavy legal paper feeling like sandpaper against my skin. The heading at the top of the first page was stamped with the seal of the family court. I did not need to read the dense legal jargon to understand what it was. This was a declaration of war. I did not hesitate. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the flashing red and blue lights of a police cruiser illuminated my living room walls. Just as the officer knocked on my open front door, a second car swerved into the driveway. It was Arthur, my husband. He rushed into the house, his face flushed with panic, taking in the sight of the uniformed officer and me standing by the kitchen island. Then, his eyes landed on the open box and its contents scattered across the marble counter. All the color instantly drained from his face. His skin turned an ashen white. "Did they really dare to do this?" Arthur gasped, his voice trembling as he leaned heavily against the doorway for support. I stared at him, my mind spinning. "What do you mean? Arthur? What do you know about this?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing guilt. Arthur confessed that exactly 2 weeks ago, Richard had cornered him in the parking garage of his architectural firm. My father had tried to coerce Arthur into signing a legal document that would completely strip me of my medical autonomy. Richard had painted a terrifying picture, claiming that I was going crazy from work pressure and that I was on the verge of a catastrophic mental breakdown. Arthur told me he had chased my father away, threatening to call security. He had kept it a secret because he thought he had handled it. He wanted to protect me from the emotional trauma of knowing my own parents were trying to institutionalize me. "I thought he was just making empty threats to get a reaction," Arthur whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "I never imagined they would go this far." While we stood there, enveloped in a suffocating cloud of betrayal, the police officer had put on a pair of blue latex gloves. He was meticulously examining the empty gray box. He ran his fingers along the inside edges and frowned. With a sharp tug, he ripped out the false bottom of the box. We both fell completely silent. Lying in the hidden compartment was a small, unmarked black USB drive. Right next to it was a tiny metallic object no larger than a button. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice deadly serious as he held up the metallic speck with a pair of tweezers. "This is a microtransmitter. It is a live bug." I took a step back, the walls of my beautiful, secure home suddenly feeling like a prison cell closing in around me. My parents had not just sent a threat, they were listening to us right now. The safe haven I had built for myself was gone. My sanctuary was officially a crime scene. Within 45 minutes, my living room transformed from a domestic space into a sterile forensic laboratory. A specialized cybercrimes unit, dispatched immediately after the patrol officer reported the live transmitter, flooded my home. 4 technicians clad in dark windbreakers moved silently through the hallways, wielding thermal scanners, radio frequency detectors, and bundles of fiber optic cables. Every electronic beep from their equipment sent a fresh jolt of terror straight down my spine. The air felt incredibly thick, heavy with the suffocating realization that the walls of my own house had been harboring ghosts. Arthur sat rigid on the edge of the leather sofa, his head buried deep in his hands, while I paced the hardwood floor, wrapping my arms around myself to ward off a chill that had absolutely nothing to do with the weather outside. The lead investigator, Detective Vance, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a demeanor carved from solid ice, approached me. "Mrs. Stewart, we need to shut down your entire main server," she instructed, her tone completely devoid of comfort. "Whoever is doing this has deeply infiltrated your smart home network." I nodded numbly, granting them the master administrative passcodes. As the house went completely dark and the emergency backup lights flickered on, the technicians began pulling apart the ventilation grates and dismantling the digital thermostats mounted on the walls. What they uncovered in the master bedroom shattered whatever fragile grip I still had on reality. Tucked deep inside the central air conditioning duct, wired directly into the smart climate control system, they found a secondary, unauthorized logic board. Detective Vance held it up in the harsh beam of her tactical flashlight. "Your heating and cooling system was violently hijacked," she explained, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "The network logs show that for the past 3 months, someone has been remotely dropping the temperature in your bedroom down to 55 degrees in the middle of the night, only to spike it up to 85 degrees an hour later." A sickening wave of nausea washed over me as the puzzle pieces violently clicked into place. For 90 days, I had been waking up drenched in cold sweat, my teeth chattering uncontrollably, my head pounding with agonizing migraines. I had blamed it on severe exhaustion, on the immense stress of running a massive tech empire, even on early medical issues. But that was not the worst of the psychological torture. Another technician, perched on an aluminum ladder near the ceiling corner, carefully extracted a device no larger than a dime from behind the drywall. It was a microspeaker, the exact kind used in corporate espionage. They daisy-chained these through the master suite and the upstairs hallway, Vance said, examining the tiny piece of hardware closely. They were programmed to emit low-frequency ambient noises and specifically targeted whispered audio tracks at irregular intervals. I clamped a hand over my mouth, suppressing a raw sob of absolute horror. The phantom voices, the sinister, incoherent whispers that had plagued the darkest hours of my nights, making me question my own sanity. I had almost scheduled a full psychiatric evaluation because I genuinely believed I was losing my mind. It was not a mental breakdown. It was a meticulously engineered symphony of psychological manipulation. The true depth of their cruelty was finally revealed when Detective Vance plugged the black USB drive from the gift box into her secure, air-gapped laptop. She motioned for Arthur and me to step closer to the glowing screen. The drive contained dozens of video files, all captured by my own supposedly secure interior security cameras. The footage had been masterfully spliced and color-graded to remove the digital timestamps and alter the ambient lighting. I stared at the screen in pure disbelief, watching a hollow-eyed, ghostly version of myself wandering into the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning. In the videos, my hair was matted with sweat from the artificial heat waves, my body shivering violently from the sudden freezing drafts, my eyes darting frantically around the room as I searched for the source of those hidden whispers. I looked completely unhinged. I looked exactly like a deranged sleepwalker who had lost all touch with reality. Beside me, Arthur let out a choked gasp, his hands clenching into tight fists as he watched the digital assassination of his wife. "This is not standard harassment," Detective Vance warned, shutting the laptop with a definitive, sharp snap. "This is an apex-level gaslighting campaign. They weaponized your own living environment to enforce severe sleep deprivation and induce clinical paranoia. The amount of money, technical expertise, and malicious intent required to pull this off is absolutely staggering. They are trying to build a bulletproof medical profile against you." Her words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. A medical profile. The stack of family court documents sitting on the kitchen island suddenly blazed in my mind with terrifying clarity. It was an application for an adult conservatorship. The bitter, agonizing truth pierced through my chest like a physical blade. My own flesh and blood were orchestrating my absolute destruction. They did not just want to embarrass me or force a family reconciliation. They were setting the stage to declare me legally incapacitated, stripping me of every fundamental human right, my financial autonomy, and my basic freedom. And the prize for selling their only daughter into a legalized form of slavery, the motive was glaringly obvious. If I were deemed mentally unfit, the conservatorship would grant them immediate, unchecked authority over my assets. Specifically, it would give them total command over my 70% controlling stake in Viridia Horizon Solutions. They were willing to lock me away in a psychiatric ward for the rest of my natural life just to lay their greedy hands on tens of millions of dollars. Standing in the dimly lit ruins of my hijacked sanctuary, the suffocating paranoia suddenly evaporated, leaving behind a profound, terrifying emptiness. And then, from that cold void, a dark, venomous clarity began to rise. They wanted a madwoman. They had absolutely no idea what kind of monster they had actually awakened. The morning sun brought absolutely no warmth. By 8 o'clock the next day, I was pulling my car into the executive parking level of Viridia Horizon Solutions, determined to initiate a full internal security sweep. But the moment the elevator doors slid open to the top floor, my reality shattered all over again. Standing squarely in front of my frosted glass office doors were 2 uniformed private security guards I had never hired, flanked by the head of my own legal compliance department. "I am sorry, Lillian," the compliance director stammered, unable to meet my furious gaze. "I cannot let you inside. We received an emergency ex parte injunction from the state judge less than an hour ago. Your executive authority has been temporarily suspended pending a full medical review." He handed me a thick manila envelope. Inside was a legally binding nightmare. The preemptive strike had been executed with terrifying speed. Richard and Eleanor had successfully filed a petition for an emergency temporary conservatorship. I flipped through the heavy pages, my eyes scanning the devastating lies they had sworn under oath. They had submitted a comprehensive psychological evaluation bearing the forged signature of a notorious puppet psychiatrist who had never even been in the same room as me. The fabricated medical report cited a severe acute psychotic break, exacerbated by chronic work addiction, severe sleep deprivation, and extreme paranoia. Attached to this fraudulent evaluation was the damning digital evidence. The sleepwalking videos from my hijacked home network were there, meticulously curated to show me at my absolute worst, wandering the halls like a hollow shell of a human being. But the betrayal cut even deeper. They had included sworn affidavits from 3 mid-level managers within my own company. Employees whose salaries I paid had been ruthlessly bribed to testify that my recent boardroom behavior was erratic, hostile, and delusional. The legal trap was utterly flawless. I turned on my heel and walked out of the building, my chest tight with a suffocating, unbearable pressure. The bureaucracy of the legal system was a massive, unfeeling machine, and my parents had just turned the key. By the time I reached the ground floor lobby, the digital news screens mounted on the walls were broadcasting the local midday reports. My blood turned to absolute ice. There they were. Richard and Eleanor were standing on the steps of the courthouse, completely surrounded by flashing cameras and eager reporters. Eleanor was dressed in a conservative gray suit, dabbing at her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken mother to absolute perfection. "We love our daughter more than anything in this world," Richard proclaimed into a cluster of microphones, his voice thick with fake, rehearsed emotion. "She is facing a severe mental breakdown, and it is destroying her from the inside out. We are not doing this to hurt her. We are only trying to save her life before she does something completely irreversible to herself and her legacy." They were painting a masterpiece of public manipulation. I was no longer a successful 34-year-old tech founder. In the eyes of the public, I was a tragic, unstable victim of corporate burnout, desperately needing her loving parents to step in and take the reins. I rushed to my car, my hands shaking violently as I pulled out my phone to call my personal wealth manager. I needed to move capital, hire an aggressive litigation team, and secure my assets immediately. But the call went straight to a generic customer service line. Panicking, I logged into my mobile banking application. Every single account balance displayed 0. My checking accounts, my high-yield savings, my diversified investment portfolios, all frozen. I pulled out my platinum credit cards and tried to run a simple online transaction for a legal retainer fee. Declined. I tried another. Declined. Every single piece of plastic in my wallet was completely useless. Under the suffocating guise of protecting the patient's assets from erratic spending, the emergency court order had completely financially paralyzed me. I had a net worth of tens of millions of dollars, yet I could not even buy a cup of coffee. They had cut off my air supply. The financial freeze was not just an inconvenience, it was a tactical strike designed to prevent me from hiring independent legal counsel. They knew that without my fortune, I was just a vulnerable woman shouting into a hurricane. Desperate, I drove straight to the downtown office of my longtime corporate attorney. I sat across his massive mahogany desk, slamming the court documents down. I expected him to breathe fire, to draft an immediate countersuit. Instead, he looked at me with a soft, pitying expression that made my stomach violently churn. "Lillian, listen to me," he said gently, folding his hands together. "The optics on this are incredibly bad. The judge saw those videos. The burden of proof is temporarily on you. If we fight this aggressively right now, you will look exactly like the paranoid, combative patient they claim you are. My professional advice is to temporarily yield. Agree to check yourself into the private psychiatric facility they recommended for a 72-hour evaluation. Play their game, prove you are perfectly sane, and we will get this dismissed next week." I stared at him, the horrifying reality of his advice sinking in. He was a corporate lawyer, completely out of his depth in the vicious, predatory arena of family court. If I stepped foot inside that private mental institution, a facility undoubtedly on my parents' payroll, I would never walk out. They would pump me full of the sedatives they had left on my doorstep. They would turn the fake diagnosis into a chemical reality. The 72 hours would turn into 3 months, then a year, then the rest of my miserable life. If I refused, the judge would see it as noncompliance and grant the permanent conservatorship by default. I stood up slowly. The overwhelming panic and helplessness that had gripped me all morning completely vanished, replaced by something entirely different. A cold, absolute clarity washed over my mind. The frantic, terrified victim they had spent months trying to mold died right there in that pristine corporate office. "Thank you for your time," I said evenly, turning away from him without another word. I walked out into the busy city streets, feeling a strange, hollow calmness settling deeply into my bones. The fire of my panic had burned out, leaving only a freezing, calculating hatred. I was done defending myself against their lies. I was done playing by the rules of a broken system that protected abusers hidden behind polite, familial smiles. They wanted to steal my life and lock me in a cage. I decided, in that very moment, that I was going to tear their entire world down to the bedrock and happily bury them under the rubble. I returned home to find Arthur waiting for me in the kitchen. I did not need to tell him what happened at the bank. The grim expression on my face said it all, without a single word. He walked into his home office, pulled away the Persian rug, and unlocked a floor safe. He hauled out a heavy duffel bag and unzipped it on the dining table. Inside were neat, banded stacks of $100 bills. It was $200,000 in untraceable cash, an emergency fund he had secretly built over the years from his freelance architectural contracts. It was our only lifeline. With hard cash in hand, I did not go back to my polite corporate attorneys. I needed a predator. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Arthur and I were sitting in the dimly lit, windowless office of Marcus Thorne. Marcus was not the kind of lawyer who played by the rules of gentlemanly litigation. He was a ruthlessly effective economic crimes attorney, a man who dismantled corporate fraudsters and wealthy criminals for a living. He had the cold, dead eyes of a great white shark. And when I laid out the situation and slid $50,000 across his desk as an initial retainer, he did not offer me a single word of pity. He simply smiled, a terrifying, razor-thin smirk, and told me we were going to war. Within 4 hours, Marcus had deployed his own private, off-the-books cybersecurity strike team. They did not care about warrants. Utilizing the frequency logs Detective Vance had left behind, Marcus's team triangulated the receiver signal for the microtransmitters hidden inside my walls. The signal bounced off a local cell tower, but anchored directly to a cheap, short-term rental apartment just 3 blocks away from my neighborhood. At exactly 11 o'clock that night, Marcus's security contractors kicked the door of that apartment completely off its hinges. They dragged the occupant out of his chair and slammed him face first onto a folding table covered in surveillance equipment. Arthur and I walked into the room a minute later. The man groaning on the table was Bradley Croft, a disgraced former police officer turned corrupt private investigator. He was the one operating the audio feeds, manipulating my thermostat, and splicing my security footage. Bradley glared at us, spitting blood onto the cheap carpet, arrogantly demanding his lawyer. I walked up to him, picked up a heavy flashlight from his desk, and slammed it down inches from his fingers. "You are not dealing with the police, Bradley," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, lethal whisper. "You committed federal wiretapping, cyber intrusion, and medical fraud. I have the best attack dog attorney in the state, and I have the financial resources to ensure you spend the next 30 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary, or that you can go to work for me right now." Mercenaries are predictably loyal only to their own survival. It took less than 5 minutes for Bradley to completely fold, sweating profusely and trembling. He unlocked his master encrypted server and handed over every single communication log he had with my parents. As Marcus sifted through the digital files, the final, shocking puzzle piece fell into place. The narrative of the concerned, Wealthy parents completely disintegrated. My parents' elite country club facade was nothing but a hollow shell. Over the past 5 years, Richard and Eleanor had completely bankrupted themselves. They were drowning in massive debt from underground offshore gambling and shady, high-risk real estate investments that had catastrophically failed. But they did not owe money to a standard bank. According to the encrypted financial threats Bradley had intercepted for them, my parents owed exactly $15 million to a ruthless underground crime syndicate. The deadline for their payment was less than 3 weeks away. If they did not produce $15 million, the syndicate was not going to send a collection agency. They were going to send killers. That was the real reason behind this entire gaslighting operation. My parents were not trying to secure my future. They were desperately trying to save their own lives. By having me declared legally incompetent, they could seize control of my tech empire, immediately liquidate my shares to a hostile buyer, pay off the mob, and disappear with the remaining millions. They were quite literally feeding their own daughter to the wolves to save their own skin. "They are terrified, completely backed into a corner," Marcus observed, his eyes gleaming with malicious calculation as he reviewed the mob's extortion emails. "Desperate prey make foolish, fatal mistakes. We just need to give them a push." Arthur and I looked at each other, the same cold strategy forming in our minds. We were not just going to defend against their conservatorship petition, we were going to bait them into stepping directly into a legal bear trap. I turned back to Bradley, who was still clutching his bruised ribs. I instructed him to carry out one final mission for his original employers. Marcus's cyber team quickly drafted a highly classified, completely fabricated financial dossier. This fake document detailed my supposed erratic plan to completely drain Viridia Horizon Solutions of all its liquid capital and transfer every single penny into untraceable offshore cryptocurrency accounts within the next 48 hours. It was the ultimate nightmare scenario for Richard and Eleanor. If I moved the money, they would have absolutely nothing left to sell to pay off their violent creditors. "You are going to remotely plant this dossier directly onto my father's private desktop computer," I commanded Bradley, handing him the encrypted drive. "You will tell him you intercepted my private emails and found this. Make him believe that if he does not seize total legal control of my life immediately, his $15 million bailout will vanish into thin air by the end of the week." The trap was set. My parents needed me to be a helpless, broken victim to execute their plan. Now, fed with fraudulent, panic-inducing evidence, they would be forced to abandon their careful, methodical approach and rush blindly into the light. I was no longer the hunted prey hiding in the shadows of my own home. I was the hunter, and I had just painted a massive target on their backs. I knew they still had eyes on me. Bradley had confessed during his interrogation that my parents employed a secondary lower-level surveillance team to tail my physical movements 24 hours a day. If I was going to successfully sell the grand illusion that the fake financial dossier was entirely real, that I was frantically trying to liquidate my massive assets and completely losing my mind in the process, I desperately needed an audience. I chose a crowded, upscale espresso bar downtown, right in the middle of the afternoon lunch rush. The place was packed with corporate executives and lingering tourists. I walked in wearing the exact same clothes I had worn the day before. I had intentionally skipped my morning shower, leaving my hair disheveled and my eyes completely devoid of makeup. I ordered a black coffee, chose a highly visible corner table, and aggressively threw my laptop open. For 10 agonizing minutes, I violently pounded on the keyboard, muttering loudly and angrily to myself, making sure the people sitting at the adjacent tables were casting nervous glances in my direction. Then, I executed the performance of an absolute lifetime. I stood up abruptly, my metal chair scraping harshly and loudly against the polished concrete floor. I grabbed my thick ceramic coffee cup and hurled it with all my strength directly at the exposed brick wall. It shattered violently into 100 flying pieces, instantly silencing the entire bustling cafe. The ambient chatter completely died. "You cannot have it," I screamed at the top of my lungs, staring wildly at a blank space on the wall as if I were viciously arguing with a ghost. "I am burning it all down, Every single penny is going into the dark web. You will never get the authorization codes. You cannot steal my life." I knocked over my own table, sending my expensive laptop crashing to the ground, and stormed out onto the busy sidewalk, leaving a room full of terrified, whispering patrons behind me. I did not even need to look over my shoulder to know the private investigators tailing me had recorded every single second of my staged, explosive psychotic break. The bait was incredibly potent. Less than 2 hours after my highly public meltdown, my secure burner phone buzzed with an encrypted text message from Marcus. The steel jaws of the trap had slammed entirely shut. Panicked by my screaming about moving the money into untraceable accounts, and genuinely believing my mind was completely and irrevocably fractured, Richard and Eleanor completely abandoned their methodical, carefully paced legal strategy. They could not afford to wait weeks for a standard competency evaluation. They instructed their aggressive attorneys to file a motion for an immediate, mandatory psychiatric confinement order. The judge granted an emergency closed-door hearing for 9 o'clock the very next morning. Their sinister goal was explicitly clear. They needed to get me locked inside a secure medical facility by noon, seize my total power of attorney by 1 o'clock, and sign the binding sale of Viridia Horizon Solutions before the banks closed for the day. They honestly thought they had backed a severely wounded, defenseless animal into a corner. That evening, the atmosphere inside my home was eerily serene. The malicious smart thermostats had been physically disconnected and ripped from the walls. The hidden microspeakers were currently resting in an evidence bag, locked inside Marcus's secure office vault. The house was finally mine again. The suffocating, heavy paranoia that had violently choked me for 3 long months was completely gone, replaced by the terrifying, cold, and absolute stillness that always precedes a catastrophic storm. Arthur and I sat side by side on the soft living room floor, our backs leaning against the heavy leather sofa. A single bottle of dark red wine sat open between us. We did not speak very much. Words felt entirely unnecessary. We simply and methodically reviewed the thick, heavy legal binders Marcus had prepared for the morning, the forensic financial audits exposing the $15 million syndicate debt, the recorded, legally binding confessions from Bradley Croft, the irrefutable digital network logs proving the home intrusion originated directly from my father's private corporate IP address. Every single thread of their manipulative web had been carefully unraveled and seamlessly woven into a hangman's noose. At exactly 10 o'clock that night, the absolute silence of the living room was suddenly broken by the sharp, familiar chime of my primary cell phone. It was a new voicemail notification. I put the device on speaker mode and set it down on the glass coffee table. Eleanor's voice slowly filled the quiet room. It was a masterful, sickening performance, thoroughly drenched in fake, trembling tears and breathy, exaggerated maternal concern. "I love you so much, Lillian." Her voice shook through the tiny speaker. "I know you are so scared right now. Your father and I are just so heartbroken watching you suffer like this. Tomorrow, all the pain will end. Please, my darling, just be a good girl and quietly accept the help we are offering. We are doing this to save you." The audio message clicked off. Arthur looked at me, a profound disgust completely contorting his features. A month ago, hearing that specific tone of voice would have made me question my own reality and beg for their forgiveness. Tonight, it just sounded like the pathetic, desperate whining of a trapped rat. I calmly picked up the phone. I did not block her number. I did not type out a furious, hateful paragraph detailing exactly what I was going to do to them. I simply opened our active text message thread, selected a single digital emoji of a slowly draining hourglass, and pressed send. Their time was completely up. The heavy oak doors of courtroom number 4 swung shut, sealing us inside. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Richard and Eleanor were already seated at the petitioner's table, looking like the absolute picture of grieving, exhausted parents. Eleanor was wearing a conservative black dress, clutching a damp handkerchief in her shaking hands, when the judge, a stern man with silver hair and sharp eyes, asked them to present their case. the award-winning performance began. For 20 agonizing minutes, they wept openly before the court. They presented the forged psychiatric evaluation and the maliciously doctored sleepwalking videos. Richard's voice cracked perfectly as he begged the judge to immediately strip me of my civil liberties, claiming it was the absolute only way to save his precious daughter from completely destroying her own life. The judge looked down at me from his high bench, his expression full of solemn pity. He asked if I had anything to say before he ruled on the emergency medical confinement order. I stood up. I was not wearing the wrinkled, coffee-stained clothes from the cafe the day before. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, dark navy, tailored business suit. My posture was perfectly straight, my mind entirely sharp, and my expression completely unreadable. "Your Honor," I stated clearly, my voice ringing out with absolute, unwavering authority. "I am in perfect psychological health, but I would like to yield the floor to my legal counsel, Mr. Marcus Thorne, to address the profound criminal conspiracy currently sitting at the opposite table." Marcus stood up, buttoning his tailored jacket with the cold, unbothered calm of an apex predator. He did not waste a single breath arguing about my mental state. He simply walked over to the court clerk and unleashed absolute hell. "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice slicing through the heavy air like a razor, "the petitioners are not trying to save their daughter. They are trying to execute a $15 million heist." He dropped a massive, physical evidence binder onto the desk. The loud thud echoed off the wooden walls. "Exhibit A," Marcus announced loudly, "a sworn, video-recorded confession from Bradley Croft, an unlicensed private investigator hired by Richard Stewart to illegally hack into my client's secure smart home system, remotely manipulate the temperature, and play hidden audio files to induce severe sleep deprivation and clinical paranoia. Exhibit B, the digital network logs confirming the cyber intrusion originated directly from the corporate IP address registered to Richard Stewart's private office. Exhibit C, the unedited, time-stamped security footage proving the videos presented to this court today were maliciously spliced and artificially color-graded to fake a mental breakdown." Eleanor completely stopped crying. The damp handkerchief fell from her hands onto the floor. Richard's face turned the terrifying color of wet ash. Marcus did not give them a single second to breathe. And finally, Exhibit D, certified financial records from an underground syndicate, proving that Richard and Eleanor Stewart currently owe exactly $15 million in illicit gambling and real estate debts. Their deadline is next week. Their sole motive for this emergency conservatorship was to declare my client legally incompetent, forcefully liquidate her 70% controlling stake in Viridia Horizon Solutions, and pay off a violent criminal enterprise to save their own lives. The silence in the courtroom was so absolute, it felt like a vacuum. The judge spent 10 excruciating minutes reading through the top files in the binder. When he finally looked up, the pity in his eyes had been completely replaced by a blazing, righteous fury. He looked at my parents with pure, unfiltered disgust. "This is the most vile, calculated abuse of the family court system I have witnessed in my entire career," the judge snarled, his voice trembling with anger. "The petition for conservatorship is immediately denied with extreme prejudice." He slammed his heavy wooden gavel down, the sound cracking like a gunshot. "Furthermore, based on the irrefutable evidence presented here today, I am signing immediate bench warrants. Bailiffs, take Richard and Eleanor Stewart into custody right now for felony fraud, extreme perjury, and criminal trespassing." The transition from arrogant predators to trapped, terrified animals was instantaneous. 2 large bailiffs moved forward, pulling my parents out of their wooden chairs. The cold, heavy clink of metal handcuffs echoed loudly across the room. As they were being escorted out into the wide marble hallway, Eleanor completely snapped. Her carefully constructed high society facade shattered into a million jagged pieces. Screaming wildly, she lunged toward me, raising her cuffed hands in a desperate attempt to slap my face. A police officer tackled her from behind, pinning her aggressively to the polished floor. Seeing his wife violently restrained, Richard's knees completely buckled, He collapsed onto the floor right in front of my shoes, tears of genuine terror streaming down his face. "Lillian, please," he sobbed, his voice cracking as he looked up at me from the ground. "We are your family. You cannot send us to federal prison. They will kill us in there. Please drop the criminal charges." I looked down at the pathetic, broken man who had given me life. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, cleansing emptiness. "Do not make things embarrassing, Richard," I replied coldly, echoing the exact threatening words from the card they had left on my doorstep. I stepped carefully around his kneeling body and walked out of the courthouse without blinking or looking back even once. 6 months later, justice had fully run its course. Richard and Eleanor were successfully prosecuted and sentenced to long terms in a federal penitentiary, stripped of all their hidden assets to pay restitution and massive legal fees. Their entire estate went into foreclosure. I bought their massive, sprawling property at a public bank auction for an absolute fraction of its original market value. I did not keep the house to sell it. I did not even walk inside to retrieve any old memories. I hired a commercial demolition crew. On a bright Tuesday morning, I stood on the sidewalk with Arthur, holding a hot cup of coffee, and watched as heavy yellow bulldozers completely leveled that toxic, miserable childhood home into a pile of shattered wood and broken glass. In its place, I paved a massive, beautiful parking lot for the expanding corporate campus of Viridia Horizon Solutions. I literally and figuratively buried the demons of my past under tons of solid concrete. The invisible trap they had set for me was destroyed, and the people who tried to bury me alive were locked in cages of their own making. My sanctuary is finally completely safe. The front door of my home is now heavily guarded, and from this day forward, it only opens for those who truly deserve to walk through it. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with me and listening to this story today. Where are you listening from right now? Please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's journey compelling and want to help us out, please consider joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. It helps us survive the YouTube demonetization and allows us to bring you the absolute best, most detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on this platform. You can easily scan the Patreon QR code on your screen or click the link in the description or the pinned comment to join our community. Thank you again from the bottom of my heart, and please stay safe out there.